Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Call. Major Jake Fletcher adjusted his tactical vest as the desert sun beat down on the forward operating base in Afghanistan. 3 tours of duty had hardened him into the kind of soldier others looked up to. Calm under pressure, strategic in thinking, and absolutely lethal when necessary. At 34, he'd earned his stripes through intelligence operations, specializing in psychological warfare and strategic planning. The men under his command trusted him with their lives, and he'd never let them down. His satellite phone buzzed, an unusual occurrence during operational hours. The caller ID showed a number from back home in Montana. Fletcher. Major Fletcher? This is Sheriff Walsh from Cascade County. I'm afraid I have some terrible news about your family. Jake's blood ran cold. He stepped away from his team, finding privacy behind a concrete barrier. What happened? Sir, your brother's ranch. Marcus is dead. He was shot multiple times yesterday evening. I'm sorry for your loss. The words hit Jake like a sniper's bullet. Marcus, his younger brother by 2 years, had been running the family ranch since their father passed. Strong, honest, and devoted to the land their grandfather had homesteaded. Who did this? Jake's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the phone. That's complicated, sir. Your wife, Sherry, was the only one with him when it happened. She called it in, said she arrived to find him already shot. But there are some inconsistencies in her story that we're looking into. Jake's mind raced. Sherry had been staying at Marcus's ranch for the past month, claiming she needed space from their marriage while he was deployed. She'd taken their 8-year-old daughter Ruby with her. Where's my daughter? The sheriff's pause stretched too long. That's another problem, Major. Ruby hasn't been seen since yesterday morning. Your wife says she was supposed to be at a friend's house, but we checked. She never arrived. We've issued an Amber Alert. Jake's training kicked in, suppressing the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. His brother was dead, his wife was involved somehow, and his little girl was missing. The pieces of his carefully ordered world were crumbling, but his mind was already shifting into tactical mode. I need to come home. Sir, there's one more thing. We found some items at the scene that suggest this wasn't random. Your brother had been investigating something. His office was ransacked, and his computer hard drive is missing. Before Jake could respond, his commanding officer, Colonel Morrison, appeared at his side. The older man's expression was grim. He'd obviously been monitoring the call. Fletcher, I heard enough. The chopper is ready. You have 48 hours of emergency leave. Go and fix everything, then come back. We need you here, but family comes first. Jake nodded, his mind already working through logistics. 48 hours to uncover the truth, find his daughter, and deal with whoever had destroyed his family. It wouldn't be enough time through normal channels. But Jake Fletcher had never been confined in normal channels. As he packed his gear, Jake's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his thoughts were darker. Marcus had always been the good brother, the one who stayed home, who built instead of destroyed. If someone had killed him, they'd made a fatal mistake. They had no idea what was coming for them. The helicopter lifted off into the desert night, carrying Jake toward a reckoning that would test every skill he'd learned in 3 tours of war. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was personal, and Jake Fletcher was about to show them a difference. Chapter 2. Homecoming. The plane touched down in Great Falls at 2:47 a.m. Jake had used the 18-hour journey to do what he did best, gather intelligence and plan. Through encrypted channels, he'd contacted old military friends now working in various agencies. By the time he landed, he had preliminary background checks, financial records, and communication intercepts that painted a disturbing picture. Sheriff Walsh met him at the airport, a weathered man in his 50s with honest eyes and a firm handshake. Major, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I served 2 tours in Iraq myself, so I understand what it means to come home to this. Just Jake now, Sheriff. What do we know? As they drove through the Montana darkness toward Cascade County, Walsh filled in the details. Marcus had been found in his kitchen, shot 3 times in the chest with a .38 caliber pistol. Sherry's story was that she'd arrived around 8 p.m. to find him dead, but the coroner estimated time of death at 6 p.m. Her car had been caught on traffic cameras leaving town at 5:30 p.m. and returning at 7:45 p.m. Where does she claim she went during those hours? Says she drove around to clear her head after an argument with Marcus about. Walsh hesitated. About what? About you. She told us Marcus was pressuring her to be more supportive of her military career, and she got upset and left. Came back to apologize and found him dead. Jake filed that information away. He knew it was a lie. Marcus had always supported Jake's choices unconditionally, and he'd never interfere in a marriage that way. They arrived at the Fletcher Ranch as dawn broke over the Rockies. The property had been in Jake's family for 3 generations. 2,000 acres of prime cattle country with a main house, several outbuildings, and miles of fencing that Marcus had maintained with pride. Yellow crime scene tape now marred the familiar landscape. Inside the house, Jake stood in the kitchen where his brother had died. The blood had been cleaned, but Jake's trained eyes caught details the local investigators had missed. Scuff marks suggesting Marcus had been surprised from behind, powder burns inconsistent with Sherry's height, and most telling, muddy boot prints that were too large for his wife's feet. Sheriff, have you checked Marcus's safe? What safe? Jake led Walsh to the basement, where behind a false wall panel, their father's old gun safe sat open and empty. Marcus had kept important documents there, deeds, insurance papers, and Jake knew a substantial amount of cash from cattle sales he'd been saving to buy adjacent land. How much cash are we talking about? Walsh asked. Around $60,000. Marcus didn't trust banks much. Walsh whistled low. Your wife know about this? She did. As they continued searching, Jake found something that made his blood boil. Ruby's backpack hidden in the barn, still containing her clothes and favorite stuffed animal. If she'd gone to a friend's house, as Sherry claimed, she would have taken these things. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Daddy, I'm scared. Can't talk. Hidden. Bad people. Love you. His heart stopped. Ruby was alive, but in danger, and she was smart enough to stay hidden, just like he'd taught her during their camping trips. Sheriff, I need to speak to my wife. She's staying at the Cascade in downtown. But Jake. Walsh's expression was troubled. There's something else. We found evidence that Marcus had been digging into some local business dealings. Specifically, a development company called Rocky Mountain Holdings that's been buying up ranch land. Your brother had files suggesting they were using intimidation tactics on reluctant sellers. Jake's tactical mind processed this new information. Marcus's murder wasn't just personal, it was business. And somehow, his wife was connected to it all. As they drove toward town, Jake's phone buzzed again. Another text from Ruby. They don't know where I am. Uncle Marcus taught me good hiding spots, but I saw everything. Jake typed back, stay hidden, princess. Daddy's coming to get the bad people. I love you. The response came immediately. I love you too, Daddy. Hurry. Jake looked out at the Montana landscape he'd grown up in, now tainted by betrayal and murder. But Ruby was alive, and she'd witnessed what happened. That meant he had an advantage his enemies didn't know about. They thought they'd killed the only witness. They were wrong. Chapter 3. Unraveling Threads. The Cascade Inn sat on Main Street like a relic from the 1950s, faded but functional. Jake found Sherry in the diner attached to the motel, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window with red-rimmed eyes. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment, he saw genuine grief there. But Jake's training had taught him to read micro-expressions, and beneath the grief was something else, relief. Jake, thank God you're here. She stood to embrace him, but he remained rigid. I can't believe Marcus is gone. And Ruby, I'm so worried about Ruby. Where is she, Sherry? I told the sheriff. She was supposed to go to Melissa Chambers' house for a sleepover, but when I called to check on her yesterday night, Patricia Chambers said Ruby never showed up. I don't understand what happened. Jake sat across from her, studying her face. Sherry was beautiful. The homecoming queen who'd caught his eye 12 years ago when he was a young soldier on leave. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that had once made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Now, looking at her, he saw only deception. Walk me through Tuesday night. Every detail. I've already told the police. Tell me. Sherry's hands trembled as she recounted her story, but Jake caught the practiced quality of it. She'd rehearsed this. Ruby and I went to Marcus's around 4 p.m. She was supposed to go to her friend's house at 5:30, but Melissa called and said they were running late. Could Ruby come at 6:30 instead? So she stayed to play with the ranch dogs while Marcus and I talked. About what? About us. Our marriage. Marcus said I was being unfair to you, not being more supportive while you were deployed. It turned into an argument, and I got upset and drove off around 5:30. I was gone maybe 2 hours, just driving and thinking. When I came back around 8, I found him. Jake let the silence stretch. A classic interrogation technique. People filled silence with truth or more lies. Sherry filled it with details that made her story worse. The front door was unlocked, which was strange. Marcus always locked up, and there was mud on the kitchen floor, like someone with dirty boots had been there. I called 911 immediately. Where was Ruby during all this? She must have already left for Melissa's while I was gone. Marcus probably gave her a ride part way, or maybe she walked. It's only a mile through the back pasture. Jake nodded, filing away each lie. His phone had buzzed twice during the conversation. Texts he'd answer later. I need you to think, Sherry. Did Marcus mention any problems he was having? Anyone who might want to hurt him? For the first time, genuine fear flickered in her eyes. There were some businessmen who'd been pressuring him to sell parts of the ranch. He said they were getting aggressive about it. A company called Rocky Mountain Holdings. Did you meet any of these men? Just once. A man named Dale Bowman came by the ranch when I was there. He was intense. Made me uncomfortable. Marcus told him to leave and not come back. Jake's blood chilled. Dale Bowman was one of the names in the files his military contacts had sent him. A former enforcer for various organized crime operations who'd supposedly gone legitimate in real estate development. Sherry, I need you to stay here at the motel. Don't go anywhere alone. This might be more dangerous than we thought. After leaving Sherry, Jake parked behind the motel and checked his messages. The first was from Ruby. Saw the man with the snake tattoo. He was mean to Uncle Marcus. Made him give papers. The second was from his contact at the NSA. Rocky Mountain Holdings is a front. 3 partners. Dale Bowman, Muscle, Vincent Turner, Money, and a silent partner. Bank records show payment to S. Fletcher for $25,000 3 weeks ago. Sorry, brother. Jake stared at the message, feeling the last pieces of his old life crumble away. Sherry had been paid by his brother's killers. She was part of the conspiracy. His phone buzzed again. Ruby, found Uncle Marcus's hiding spot. He left something for you. The old oak tree where we carved our names. Jake knew the tree. A massive oak on the back 40 where he, Marcus, and Ruby had spent countless hours during his leaves. If Marcus had hidden something there, it would be the evidence Jake needed. But first, he had another stop to make. Sheriff Walsh had mentioned that Marcus's computer hard drive was missing, but Jake knew his brother better than that. Marcus was paranoid about technology. He always kept backups. The sun was setting as Jake drove back to the ranch. The crime scene tape was still up, but Jake had keys, and the sheriff had given him permission to retrieve personal items. What he was really retrieving was justice. In Marcus's bedroom, Jake found what he was looking for behind a picture of their parents. A hidden external hard drive containing terabytes of data. Marcus had been methodical in documenting the pressure campaign against local ranchers. Photos of intimidation tactics, recordings of threatening phone calls, financial records showing Rocky Mountain Holdings connections to organized crime, and most damning of all, evidence that they were planning to force ranchers off their land to build a luxury resort complex. But the final file made Jake's hands shake with rage. It was a recording from the night Marcus died. His brother's voice, scared but determined. If something happens to me, Jake, you need to know the truth. Sherry's been working with them for months. They promised her a new life, money, everything she thought she deserved. She was supposed to get me to sign over the mineral rights, but when I refused, they decided to take everything by force. I'm sorry, brother. I should have told you sooner. The recording continued with the sound of vehicles arriving, voices Jake didn't recognize, and Marcus saying, I already called Jake. He's coming home, and you don't want to be here when he arrives. Then gunshots, then silence. Jake sat in the darkness of his brother's room, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal that ran deeper than he'd imagined. His wife hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been part of a conspiracy that got his brother killed and put his daughter in danger. But Marcus had been right about one thing. They didn't want to be there when Jake Fletcher arrived. Unfortunately for them, he was already here. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Moon. Jake spent the night at the ranch, not sleeping but planning. By dawn, he had a complete tactical assessment of his enemies and a strategy that would have impressed his commanding officers. The beauty of it was its simplicity. He would turn their own greed and paranoia against. First, he needed to secure Ruby. Following her cryptic messages, he hiked to the old oak tree in the pre-dawn darkness. Hidden in a hollow his brother had carved years ago, Jake found a waterproof container with more evidence and a note. Jake, if you're reading this, they got me. Ruby saw everything. She's hiding in the old mine shaft on the North Ridge. There's a month's worth of supplies there. She's safe but scared. Don't trust anyone in town except Sheriff Walsh. The corruption goes deeper than you think. Make them pay. Marcus. The mine shaft was an abandoned silver operation from the 1920s, dangerous enough that locals avoided it, but familiar territory to Ruby from their father-daughter adventures. Jake found her there 2 hours later, dirty and scared but unharmed, clutching her uncle's rifle. Daddy! She ran into his arms, and for a moment, Jake allowed himself to feel the relief before switching back to tactical mode. You did good, princess. Uncle Marcus will be proud. Now tell me exactly what you saw. Ruby's account was devastating in its clarity. She'd been playing in the barn when the men arrived, 3 of them, including the man with the snake tattoo she'd mentioned. Her mother had let them in, had been talking to them like she knew them. Ruby had watched from the hayloft as they demanded Marcus sign papers. Uncle Marcus said no, and the mean man hit him. Mama just watched, Daddy. She didn't try to help. Ruby's voice broke. Then Uncle Marcus saw me and told me to run to our special place. I heard the loud noises when I was running. Jake held his daughter close, his heart breaking for her innocence lost and his rage building at his wife's betrayal. But Ruby wasn't finished. Daddy, there's more. I saw Mama take money from the mean man. A big envelope. And she kissed him, not like friends kiss. The final piece clicked into place. Sherry wasn't just working with Dale Bowman. She was involved with him romantically. The $25,000 payment wasn't just for information. It was the first installment on a new life with a new man. Jake got Ruby settled with supplies and a satellite phone, teaching her the emergency protocols he'd developed for his military operations. She would stay hidden until he could guarantee her safety. Princess, I need you to be brave a little longer. The bad people think you're lost, and that keeps you safe. Can you do that for Daddy? Ruby nodded solemnly. Are you going to get them, Daddy? Like you got the bad guys in Afghanistan. Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to get them. Back in town, Jake began phase 2 of his plan. He visited Rocky Mountain Holdings' office, a converted storefront on Main Street. The receptionist, a nervous woman named Tanya Durham, nearly jumped out of her skin when this hard-eyed soldier walked in asking about property acquisitions. I'm Jake Fletcher. My brother Marcus was recently killed, and I understand your company had been interested in purchasing his ranch. Dale Bowman emerged from a back office within minutes. A thick-set man with prison tattoos barely concealed by an expensive suit. The snake tattoo Ruby had mentioned coiled around his forearm. Mr. Fletcher, my condolences on your loss. I heard it was a robbery gone wrong. That's what they say. But I'm a practical man, Mr. Bowman. My brother's dead, my daughter's missing, and I need to get back to Afghanistan. I want to sell the ranch quickly, and I understand you pay cash. Greed flickered in Bowman's eyes. I'm sure we can work something out. When are you looking to close? Tomorrow. I don't have time for lengthy negotiations. Bowman's smile revealed gold teeth. A man after my own heart. Shall we say 50 cents on the dollar? Given the circumstances. Jake pretended to consider this. That's lower than I hoped, but acceptable. One condition. I want to meet your partners. A deal this size, I assume others are involved. Vincent Turner handles our finances. We could meet tonight, finalize everything. Perfect. And Mr. Bowman? I like my wife to be there. She's been through hell, and I want her to see that we're going to be financially secure. That evening, Jake called Sherry from the ranch. I need you to come here tonight. There are some insurance matters we need to discuss, and I want to show you something Marcus left for us. Sherry's voice was guarded. Can't it wait? I'm still so shaken up. It's important, Sherry. These men who are pressuring Marcus, I'm meeting with them tonight. They want to buy the ranch, and I want your opinion before I decide anything. The pause told Jake everything. She was calculating, wondering if he suspected anything. What time? 7 o'clock. Come alone. I don't want Ruby seeing the place where Marcus died until we've had time to process this as a family. At 6:30, Jake was hidden in the barn loft where Ruby had witnessed her uncle's murder, watching as vehicles approached the ranch. First came Sherry's car, then a black SUV containing 3 men. Through high-power binoculars, Jake identified Dale Bowman, a thin man who must be Vincent Turner, and a third man he didn't recognize. The meeting played out exactly as Jake had predicted. Sherry led the men into the house, comfortable in their presence, proving her complicity. Through the kitchen window, Jake watched as Bowman spread papers across the same table where Marcus had died. Jake activated the recording equipment he placed throughout the house that afternoon, military-grade surveillance gear that would capture every word. He needed their confessions before he could proceed to the final phase. What he heard exceeded his expectations. Not only did they discuss Marcus's murder openly, but they revealed the scope of their operation. Dozens of ranchers intimidated into selling, local officials corrupted, and plans for a development that would destroy the entire valley's way of life. And Sherry's voice, clear and cold, Marcus never would have sold. You did what you had to do. I just wish Jake didn't have to come back. This complicates things. Don't worry, baby, Bowman replied. After tomorrow, your husband won't be a problem anymore. Lots of soldiers don't make it home from Afghanistan. Jake's finger tightened on his rifle. They were planning to kill him too, probably make it look like he died overseas. It was the final confirmation he needed. The hunter's moon was rising over the Montana mountains, and Jake Fletcher was ready to collect his due. Chapter 5. The Reckoning Begins. Jake watched from the barn as the meeting continued inside his childhood home. The recording equipment was capturing everything: conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, extortion, and enough federal crimes to put them away for life. But Jake's plan went beyond mere justice through the courts. These people had destroyed his family and planned to kill him. They deserved something more immediate and permanent. At 8:47 p.m., Jake received the signal he'd been waiting for, a text from Sheriff Walsh confirming that federal agents were standing by at predetermined positions around the property. Jake had spent the afternoon briefing them on his plan, using his military credentials and the evidence he'd gathered to coordinate a joint operation. But first, he needed to confront the betrayal that cut deepest. Jake entered the house through the back door, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. The voices from the kitchen grew clearer as he approached. Problem is the daughter, Turner was saying. Kid's been missing for 2 days. What if she saw something? Ruby's 8 years old, Sherry replied dismissively. Even if she did see something, who's going to believe a traumatized child over a grieving widow? Kids talk, Bowman said. And Fletcher here is military intelligence. He'll know how to get information out of her. Then we handle Fletcher before he can, Sherry said coldly. Make it look like grief drove him to suicide. Tragic war hero, lost his brother and daughter, couldn't cope. Jake stepped into the kitchen doorway. Hello, Sherry. The silence that followed was pregnant with shock and fear. Sherry's face went pale, while Bowman's hand moved toward his jacket. The third man, who Jake now recognized as Vincent Turner, simply sat frozen. Jake, Sherry recovered first, her voice perfectly pitched with false relief. Thank God you're here. These men were just offering to help find Ruby. Stop. Jake's voice carried the authority of a combat officer. I've heard enough. Bowman was faster than Jake had expected, his gun clearing his jacket in a practice draw. But Jake was faster, his service pistol appearing in his hand within human speed. The shot echoed through the kitchen, and Bowman's weapon clattered to the floor as he screamed, clutching his shattered wrist. Nobody else moves, Jake commanded, his weapon trained on Turner while keeping Sherry in his peripheral vision. Vincent Turner, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about a dozen federal charges. Dale Bowman, Same charges plus the murder of Marcus Fletcher. You can't arrest us, Turner sputtered. You're not law enforcement. No, but they are. Jake gestured toward the windows as FBI agents appeared, weapons drawn. Sheriff Walsh entered through the front door, followed by Agent Patricia Chambers, whom Jake now realized wasn't just any federal agent, but an undercover operative who'd been investigating Rocky Mountain Holdings for months. Mrs. Fletcher, Agent Chambers said, producing handcuffs, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to murder, and kidnapping. Kidnapping. Sherry's composure finally cracked. I never kidnapped anyone. You reported your daughter missing when you knew she was safe, wasting federal resources, and causing emotional distress. That's kidnapping by deception under federal law. Jake watched as his wife was handcuffed, her beautiful face twisted with rage and desperation. Jake, you don't understand. I did this for us, for our family. We could have had everything. We had everything, Jake replied quietly. A home, a daughter who adored you, a brother who would have died for you. And you threw it all away for money and a man who was planning to kill me. As the agents led the prisoners away, Agent Chambers approached Jake. We've been tracking Rocky Mountain Holdings for 18 months. Your brother's investigation gave us the final pieces we needed. Without his courage and your tactical expertise, they would have gotten away with it. What happens now? Bowman and Turner will face federal charges. With your recordings and Ruby's testimony, they're looking at life sentences. Your wife. Chambers paused. The evidence suggests she was manipulated as much as she was complicit. She'll likely face 15 to 20 years, but she'll be eligible for parole. Jake nodded. Justice would be served, but it felt hollow. His brother was still dead, his marriage was over, and his daughter would grow up knowing her mother had betrayed their family. There's something else, Chambers said. We found evidence of a broader conspiracy. Rocky Mountain Holdings has been operating in 4 states, using similar tactics to acquire properties for a massive development project. Your actions tonight have broken up a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. As the police cars disappeared into the Montana night, Jake stood alone in his childhood kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. The house felt empty without Marcus's laughter, without Ruby's footsteps on the stairs, without the life they'd all shared. But Ruby was safe, the killers were caught, and Jake had 48 hours to decide what came next. His phone buzzed. A message from Ruby. Are the bad people gone, Daddy? Jake typed back, Yes, Princess. The bad people are gone. Forever. Can I come home now? Jake looked around the kitchen where his brother had died, where his wife had betrayed everything they'd built together. This wasn't home anymore. Home was wherever he and Ruby could build something new, something clean, something honest. We're going to make a new home, sweetheart. Just you and me. Would you like that? Yes, Daddy. I love you. I love you too, Princess. Daddy's coming to get you. Jake holstered his weapon and walked out of the house without looking back. Tomorrow, he would resign his commission, sell the ranch, and start over somewhere Ruby could grow up without the shadow of this betrayal. Tonight, he would hold his daughter and begin the long process of healing. The reckoning was complete, but the real work, rebuilding their lives, was just beginning. Chapter 6, Buried Secrets. 3 hours after the arrests, Jake sat in Sheriff Walsh's office, staring at a file folder that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about the conspiracy. Agent Chambers had stayed behind to brief him on discoveries that emerged during the interrogation of Dale Bowman. Your brother wasn't their first victim, Chambers said, spreading photos across the desk. Rocky Mountain Holdings has been operating for 3 years, and we've identified 7 suspicious deaths across 4 states. All ranchers or property owners who refused to sell. The photos showed men and women Jake didn't recognize, but their stories were heartbreakingly familiar. Intimidation, escalating threats, and finally, violent deaths made it look like accidents or random crimes. Marcus figured out, Jake said, studying the evidence. That's why he was documenting everything. More than that, your brother was in contact with relatives of some of these victims. He was building a case to expose the entire operation. Walsh pulled out another file. We found correspondence with a woman named Maxine Blanchard in Wyoming. Her husband owned mineral rights worth millions. He died in what looked like a hunting accident 6 months ago. Jake's tactical mind processed the implications. Marcus wasn't just investigating local corruption. He was trying to stop a serial killing operation. And they knew it, Chambers added. Bowman claims your wife told them about Marcus's investigation. She'd been feeding them information for weeks, including details about his evidence gathering and his plans to contact federal authorities. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. Sherry hadn't just been unfaithful or greedy. She'd been actively helping murderers stay ahead of the investigation. There's more, Walsh said quietly. During her interrogation, your wife revealed that Ruby wasn't supposed to be at the ranch that night. The plan was for Marcus to be killed while Ruby was safely at her friend's house, giving your wife an alibi, the grieving sister-in-law who'd taken the child away from danger. But Ruby got sick and the sleepover was canceled, Jake realized. Exactly, which meant she witnessed the murder, throwing off their entire plan. That's when they decided you needed to be eliminated too. Too much risk that Ruby would remember details and that you'd investigate. Jake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Montana town where he'd grown up. How many other communities were being destroyed by operations like this? How many families had lost everything to criminals masquerading as legitimate businessmen? What about the silent partner Bowman mentioned? Chambers and Walsh exchanged a look that Jake didn't miss. That's the biggest revelation of all, Chambers said. The silent partner is Martha Snell, the county commissioner. She's been using her position to identify vulnerable properties and facilitate the intimidation campaigns. Your brother discovered her involvement, which is why they had to escalate to murder. Jake felt the familiar cold rage building. Martha Snell had been a family friend for years, someone who'd attended barbecues at the ranch, who'd bounced Ruby on her knee during county fairs. Another betrayal, another person who'd smiled at his family while plotting their destruction. Where is she? That's the problem. As soon as word of the arrest got out, she disappeared. We've issued warrants, but she had a 3-hour head start. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your wife wasn't the only one with secrets, soldier boy. Check your brother's bedroom again. The real evidence is where you and Marcus used to hide from your father's belt. Jake stared at the message. Only 3 people had known about that hiding spot. Himself, Marcus, and Martha Snell, who'd been friends with their mother and had occasionally provided refuge when their father came home drunk and violent. I need to go back to the ranch. Jake, the property is still an active crime scene. 5 minutes. There's something I missed. An hour later, Jake stood in Marcus's bedroom with Agent Chambers, remembering the summer he and his brother had discovered the loose floorboard under the window. They'd hidden there during their father's worst episodes, 2 scared boys comforting each other in the darkness. Jake pried up the board with a kitchen knife. Inside was a manila envelope containing documents that made his blood run cold. Jesus, Chambers whispered, reading over his shoulder. The papers revealed that Martha Snell hadn't just been the silent partner. She'd been the mastermind. Rocky Mountain Holdings was her creation, designed to systematically acquire valuable properties throughout the Mountain West. The development project was a cover story. The real goal was to control mineral rights, water access, and strategic land for a massive energy extraction operation backed by overseas investors. But the most damning document was a handwritten letter from Marcus to Jake, dated the day before his murder. Brother, if you're reading this, Martha got to me before I could stop her. She's been using her position for years, not just with the land scheme, but with other corruption. Remember the Chambers family that died in the car crash 2 years ago? The Stafford's barn fire? All of them refused to sell to her shell companies. She's killed at least 12 people, Jake, and she's going to kill more. I tried to reason with her, told her I'd keep quiet if she stopped, but she laughed. Said I was too much like our mother, too moral for my own good. She's planning something big, and Sherry's just a pawn. Watch out for Ruby. Martha knows you'll come for her, and she'll use our little girl to get to you. Don't trust anyone except Sheriff Walsh. I vetted him personally. The evidence is hidden in 3 locations I've marked on a map. Get them all before she can destroy them. Make her pay for what she's done to all these families. Marcus, Attached to the letter was a hand-drawn map showing locations around the county where Marcus had hidden copies of evidence. But it was the final note that made Jake's hands shake. P.S. Martha has been embezzling from the county for 10 years. The missing funds are in offshore accounts I've tracked. She needs the development money to cover her tracks before the state audit next month. If this plan fails, she'll run, and dozens of murders will go unsolved forever. Jake looked up at Agent Chambers. How long would it take to get federal warrants for all these locations? Hours, maybe days. We don't have days. If Martha realizes what Marcus found, she'll destroy everything and disappear forever. Jake made a decision that his commanding officers would have recognized. When time was critical and lives were at stake, sometimes you had to operate outside normal parameters. Agent Chambers, I'm going to recover that evidence. You can arrest me afterward if necessary, but those families deserve justice. Jake, you can't just. Yes, I can. I'm not law enforcement, so the rules of evidence don't apply to me the same way. Anything I find, I can turn over to you for proper legal processing. Chambers studied Jake's face and saw the same determination that had made him an effective military officer. Unofficially, if a concerned citizen were to stumble across evidence of federal crimes and turn it over to proper authorities. Exactly. Jake folded the map and headed for the door. The reckoning was expanding beyond the immediate murderers to the corruption that had made it possible. Martha Snell thought she'd eliminated the only threat to her operation, but she'd miscalculated. Jake Fletcher was just getting started. Chapter 7, The Final Hunt. At 3:27 a.m., Jake crouched in the shadows outside the abandoned grain elevator where Marcus's map indicated the second cache of evidence was hidden. He'd already recovered the first cache from a hollow tree near the old Miller homestead. Financial records, photographs, and recorded conversations that painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning a decade. The grain elevator sat on county land, technically making Jake a trespasser, but he'd learned long ago that technical legalities meant little when lives were at stake. Using night vision equipment from his military kit, he spotted the motion sensors Martha's people had installed since Marcus's death. They were watching the locations, which meant they knew about the evidence. Jake disabled the sensors with the efficiency of someone who'd performed similar operations in hostile territory, then made his way inside the structure. The evidence cache was hidden in a concealed compartment Marcus had built into the elevator's control room. More proof of Martha Snell's criminal enterprise, including bank records showing bribes to state officials and contract for the elimination of problem landowners. As Jake photographed the documents, his secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Agent Chambers. Snell's on the move. Private jet filed flight plan to Cayman Islands. We have maybe 6 hours before she's beyond extradition. Jake typed back. One more location. Marcus's final cache has something big. Too dangerous. Local deputies report armed men patrolling the area. Then I go darker. Jake switched off his phone and checked his equipment. The final location was the most dangerous. An abandoned mining operation in the hills where Martha's men would have every advantage. But Marcus wouldn't have risked hiding evidence there unless it was absolutely crucial. An hour later, Jake lay prone on a ridge overlooking the mine, studying the tactical situation through high-powered optics. 3 vehicles, at least 8 armed men, and patrol patterns that suggested military or paramilitary training. These weren't local criminals. Martha had brought in professionals. Jake's mind shifted into combat mode, analyzing fields of fire, escape routes, and the enemy's likely responses to various approaches. The smart play would be to retreat and wait for federal backup. But the smart play would also let Martha escape with evidence of dozens of murders. Sometimes smart wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to be willing to risk everything. Jake moved through the darkness like a ghost, using terrain and shadows to avoid detection while working closer to the mine entrance. His plan was simple: create chaos, infiltrate during the confusion, retrieve the evidence, and extract before they could organize an effective response. The first sentry never saw him coming. Jake's combat training made the takedown silent and efficient, leaving the man unconscious but alive. The second sentry was more alert, but Jake's approach from an unexpected angle gave him the crucial seconds he needed. By the time Jake reached the mine entrance, he'd neutralized 4 guards and created enough uncertainty among the remaining men to keep them focused on perimeter security rather than the cache location. Inside the mine, Jake found Marcus's final gift, a steel briefcase containing evidence that would reshape the entire investigation. Financial records showing Martha's connections to organized crime families across 3 states, correspondence with foreign investors planning to strip mine the entire region, and most damning of all, a ledger documenting payments for 23 murders over the past decade. But it was the final item that made Jake's blood freeze, a detailed plan for eliminating him and Ruby, disguised as a murder-suicide motivated by grief. Martha had orchestrated everything from the beginning, planning to use their family's tragedy as the final piece of her cover story. Jake was studying the documents when voices echoed from the mine entrance. The remaining guards had discovered their unconscious colleagues and were closing in. "Fletcher, we know you're in there." The voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Come out with your hands visible and nobody gets hurt." Jake smiled grimly. They were thinking like criminals, not like soldiers. They expected him to panic, to make mistakes, to be intimidated by superior numbers. They were wrong. "I've got a better idea," Jake called back, his voice echoing through the mine tunnels. "You all leave now, and I won't have to explain to your families why you died protecting a serial killer. You've got 30 seconds, Fletcher, then we're coming in." Jake used those 30 seconds to position improvised explosive devices created from mining equipment and flares he'd found in the abandoned workings. When the men entered the mine, they would find themselves in a maze of tunnels with multiple hazards and no clear sight lines. The first explosion lit up the mine entrance, sending dust and debris cascading through the tunnels. In the chaos that followed, Jake moved through the workings like a predator, using the terrain and his superior knowledge of close-quarters combat to systematically neutralize the threat. When the dust settled, 5 men lay unconscious or incapacitated, and Jake walked out of the mine, carrying the briefcase that would end Martha Snell's operation forever. His phone had 17 missed calls from Agent Chambers. Jake dialed her back. "Jesus Christ, Jake, we heard explosions." "Are you?" "I'm fine. How much time do we have?" "Maybe 2 hours. Her plane's being fueled, but we've managed to delay takeoff with air traffic control issues." "That's enough time. I'm sending you photos of everything Marcus found. It's bigger than we thought, Agent Chambers. Much bigger." As Jake drove through the Montana dawn toward the rendezvous point where Ruby waited, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The evidence would put Martha Snell and her entire organization away forever. The families of her victims would finally have justice. But the most important victory was simpler. Ruby would grow up safe, knowing that the people who destroyed their family had been held accountable. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "I love you, Daddy. Thank you for keeping your promise." He typed back, "Always, Princess. The bad people can never hurt us again." For the first time in days, Jake Fletcher smiled. Chapter 8. Justice Served. The federal courthouse in Helena buzzed with media attention as the trials began 6 months later. Jake sat in the witness section, Ruby beside him, watching as the justice system processed the largest criminal conspiracy in Montana's history. Dale Bowman had been sentenced first. Life in prison without parole for the murder of Marcus Fletcher and 6 other victims across 4 states. His testimony, given in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, had revealed the full scope of Martha Snell's operation and led to arrests in 12 states. Vincent Turner received 45 years for racketeering and conspiracy. During his sentencing, he tried to claim he'd been manipulated by others, but the financial records Jake had recovered proved Turner had personally orchestrated the money laundering operation that made the murders profitable. Now, it was Martha Snell's turn to face justice. Jake watched as the woman who'd once bounced Ruby on her knee was led into the courtroom in shackles. Prison had aged her dramatically. The polished county commissioner had been replaced by a haggard woman whose eyes held no trace of remorse. "The defendant will rise for sentencing," Judge Kirsten Bowman announced. Martha Snell stood, her public defender beside her, as the judge reviewed the unprecedented list of charges. 23 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, public corruption, and a dozen other federal crimes. Mrs. Snell, in 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a defendant whose crimes were so systematic, so cold-blooded, and so devastating to the communities you were elected to serve. You used your position of public trust to orchestrate the murders of innocent families whose only crime was refusing to surrender their homes and heritage to your greed. Judge Bowman paused, looking directly at Martha. The prosecution has requested the death penalty, which would be appropriate given the scope of your crimes. However, your cooperation in uncovering the broader conspiracy and identifying other criminal organizations has convinced me that justice would be better served by ensuring you live to see the full consequences of your actions. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without possibility of parole on each count of murder, to be served consecutively. Additionally, you are sentenced to 25 years on each count of conspiracy, racketeering, and public corruption, also to be served consecutively. In total, you will serve 12 consecutive life sentences plus 450 years. Martha's legs buckled, and her attorney had to support her as the reality of never leaving prison alive sank in. Furthermore, the judge continued, all assets connected to your criminal enterprise, totaling approximately $47 million, will be forfeited to the federal government and distributed to the families of your victims. Jake felt Ruby squeeze his hand. His daughter had been remarkably resilient throughout the ordeal, helped by counseling and the knowledge that her uncle's killers would never hurt anyone again. After the sentencing, Jake and Ruby waited outside the courthouse for Agent Chambers, who had become a friend during the investigation. "How does it feel?" Chambers asked as she approached. "Like Marcus can finally rest in peace," Jake replied. "And like Ruby can grow up without looking over her shoulder." "What about Sherry?" Jake had attended his wife's sentencing 2 months earlier. Her attorney had successfully argued that she'd been manipulated and coerced, and her cooperation with federal investigators had earned her a reduced sentence of 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. She made her choices, Jake said simply. Ruby will decide when she's older whether she wants a relationship with her mother. Agent Chambers handed Jake an envelope. "This is for you, from the families of the other victims. They wanted to thank you for giving them closure." Inside were letters from dozens of people whose loved ones had been murdered by Martha's organization. Wives who'd lost husbands, children who'd lost parents, entire communities that had been devastated by the systematic elimination of anyone who stood in the way of greed. Jake read each letter aloud to Ruby as they drove back to their new home in Colorado. They'd sold the Montana ranch and used the money to buy a smaller place near Denver, where Ruby could attend an excellent school and Jake could start his new career as a private security consultant. "Daddy," Ruby said as they pulled into their driveway, "do you think Uncle Marcus would be proud of us?" Jake looked at his daughter, brave, intelligent, and somehow still optimistic despite everything she'd witnessed. Marcus would indeed be proud, not just of how they'd brought justice to his killers, but of how they'd rebuilt their lives without letting anger or fear define them. "I think Uncle Marcus is very proud, Princess. We kept our promise to him." "What promise?" "To make sure the bad people couldn't hurt any other families." That night, Jake tucked Ruby into bed and found himself thinking about the path that had led them here. The phone call in Afghanistan that had shattered his world had ultimately led to saving dozens of families from similar tragedies. Marcus's death had exposed a criminal conspiracy that might have continued for years. Jake's phone buzzed with a message from Sheriff Walsh. "Thought you should know. The federal task force you inspired has broken up 3 more organizations in Wyoming and Idaho. Your brother's investigation is still saving lives." Jake smiled and typed back, "Marcus would like that." As he turned off the lights, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. The mission was complete, justice had been served, and Ruby was safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would face them together, as a family rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The final victory belonged not to the criminals who had destroyed so much, but to the people who had refused to let evil triumph. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 1 year later, Jake stood in the backyard of their Colorado home, watching Ruby practice shooting with the .22 rifle he'd given her for her 9th birthday. She'd become an excellent marksman, but more importantly, she'd regained her confidence and sense of security. "Nice grouping, princess," Jake called as Ruby fired her final round at the target 30 yards away. "Thanks, Daddy. I've been thinking about what you said about protecting people who can't protect themselves." Jake walked over and examined her target, all 10 shots within a 3-inch circle. Ruby had inherited the Fletcher family's natural shooting ability, but she'd also inherited something more valuable: their sense of justice. "What kind of protecting are you thinking about? Maybe FBI, like Agent Chambers, or maybe military like you. I want to catch bad people before they hurt families like they hurt ours." Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Ruby was too young to make such decisions, but her instincts were sound. She understood that justice required people willing to stand up against evil, regardless of the personal cost. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Agent Chambers. "Jake, I have a proposition for you. We're forming a new federal task force focused on organized crime in rural areas. The success of the Montana operation has convinced Washington that we need specialists who understand both small-town dynamics and tactical operations. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to do what you did in Montana on a national scale. We've identified at least 15 similar operations across the country. Rural communities being systematically destroyed by criminal organizations that local law enforcement can't handle alone." Jake looked at Ruby, who was cleaning her rifle with the same attention to detail he'd taught her. A new career fighting the kind of criminals who had murdered Marcus would be dangerous, but it would also mean other families wouldn't have to go through what they'd experienced. What would it involve? Based in Denver, so Ruby wouldn't have to change schools. Travel when cases require it, but mostly coordination and training. We want you to develop protocols for investigating rural organized crime and train other agents in your tactical approaches. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. The work would be satisfying, using his skills to protect innocent people, but it would also mean Ruby would know her father was regularly putting himself in danger. "I need to discuss it with Ruby." "Of course. Take your time. The position will be there when you're ready." That evening, Jake and Ruby sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset over the Rocky Mountains. He explained Agent Chambers' offer, letting Ruby understand that the decision would affect both of their lives. "Will we still live here?" Ruby asked. "Yes. I travel sometimes, but this would always be home." "And you'd catch bad people like the ones who killed Uncle Marcus?" "That will be part of it." Ruby was quiet for several minutes, her young mind processing adult complexities. Finally, she looked up at her father with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "Daddy, when I have nightmares about that night, you know what makes me feel better?" "What, sweetheart?" "Knowing that those people can never hurt anyone else because you stopped them. I think there are other little girls having nightmares because nobody's stopped their bad people yet." Jake pulled Ruby closer, amazed by her capacity for empathy despite her own trauma. "Are you saying I should take the job?" "I'm saying Uncle Marcus would want you to help other families. And I want to help too, when I'm old enough." 3 months later, Jake Fletcher reported to the Denver Federal Building as the newest member of the Rural Organized Crime Task Force. His first case involved a land-grabbing scheme in Wyoming remarkably similar to Martha Snell's operation. Ruby attended the swearing-in ceremony, proud to see her father taking an oath to protect and serve the communities that criminals thought were too isolated to defend themselves. Agent Chambers approached them afterward. "How does it feel to be back in the fight?" "Like Marcus is with us," Jake replied, looking at Ruby, who was studying the FBI seal on the wall with intense interest. "We're not done making the bad people pay." That night, Jake read Ruby a bedtime story about a princess who learned to be a warrior to protect her kingdom. As she drifted off to sleep, Ruby mumbled, "Daddy, when I grow up and join the FBI, will you teach me everything you learned in Afghanistan?" "Everything that matters," Jake promised. "Honor, courage, and never giving up when you're fighting for something important." Outside their window, the lights of Denver stretched toward the mountains, a city full of families sleeping safely because people like Jake Fletcher stood watch against the darkness. In the distance, the peaks of the Rockies caught the moonlight, eternal guardians of the valley where Marcus Fletcher had lived and died for the land he loved. The reckoning was complete, but the mission continued. Evil would always exist, but so would people willing to fight it. And in a small house in Colorado, a little girl dreamed of the day she would join that fight, carrying forward the legacy of an uncle she would never forget and a father who had shown her that justice was worth any sacrifice. The Fletcher family tradition of protecting the innocent would continue, one generation at a time, one battle at a time, until the last bad person learned that some families you simply don't mess with. The blood debt had been paid in full, but the victory belonged to the living, and to the future they would build together.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.